Hi, class. Let's talk about Chapter 2. That's what's on cue in addition to Chapter 5 for this week, but I really wanted to re emphasize some of the ideas that I put in writing for Chapter 2. And first off, I think our authors gave this chapter the wrong name. This is not a chapter just about social media. We know what social media is, but what we're really looking at is all sorts of communication channels. It's a bigger and broader topic than what the label for chapter 2 wants it to seem like. So just keep in mind the idea of the channel of communication. I always like going back to chapter 1, looking at that transactional model of communication to understand what is it we're really considering and learning more about when we dive through all of these other chapters. But chapter 2 is really thinking about the means of transmitting your message from sender to receiver. How is it getting from one place to another? In traditional communication, we think of a face-to-face conversation, which is kind of funny for me to say as I'm recording this at my laptop, but it is going through some sort of transmission. We have face-to-face, which is what we can compare everything else to, but there are so many other formats of getting a message from one place to another. Sometimes it's just written communication, but frequently it's also including video and audio. So what can we do to understand this idea of communication channels better? Well, first we can think about three different categories. There are three things that our book really puts together as categorizations and ways that we can critique messages. And again, we're comparing everything to face-to-face communication. First, we can look at how rich or lean a message is. This whole comparison is really considering how much nonverbal communication can be wrapped up in the message. Think about face-to-face communication as encompassing the richest message possible. We can see people's expressions. We can observe body language and the eye contact. We can hear the tonality of their voice and expressions of emotions and a lot of other elements that are really considered rich communication traits. We strip some of those away depending upon the communication channels that we use. Plain text obviously is really, really lean, the opposite of being a rich message, because it doesn't convey all of those things. Think of how easy it is to misinterpret a message when it is lean. We don't know if somebody's being sarcastic or not. Text messaging used to be even more dangerous and leaner before we started having emojis and emoticons as an addition that can be added to it. So we always are looking for ways to enhance messages so they can be at least a little bit richer. But which is better? Honestly, it depends upon the situation. That's something the authors didn't really declare as clearly as I wish they would have in this chapter. There's a time and a place for almost all communication channels. If that weren't the case, they wouldn't exist. But sometimes a lean message is perfectly appropriate. Sometimes we want the richer channels. And what we need to learn to do to be really competent and astute communicators is determine the most appropriate channel of communication. In addition to considering how lean or rich a message is going to be depending upon the channel that we choose, we can also think of how immediate it is. We have this idea of synchronous communication. That's what happens again when we are face to face. It is in live time. There's no delay between the sending and receiving process and also the feedback that happens. It's instantaneous and live. There are a couple of formats that allow us to do this that are also mediated, meaning that they go through some sort of channel that's not face-to-face. Video conferencing is really, really close, but not a whole lot else. Really is all that synchronous. Usually there's a delay, and often it's okay that there's a delay. It doesn't have to be instant. That's why we send text messages instead of just rely on phone calls. The last consideration that we can use and categorization for different types of mediated messages is how permanent or temporary the communication is going to be. Think of all of the ways that you can retrieve information that has been sent to you on your phone or your computer. we usually know that some of this is really important and we want to be able to refer back to it. So the permanence is a goal. We don't often have that in face-to-face communication. We have to record it in one way, shape, or form. Think of in situations where you are taking a class live. What do you do to make sure that you remember what's been said during a lecture? You take notes. We want to be able to have ongoing access to the information, and that's one of the ways that we do it. So again, we have 3 categories that we can use to evaluate all channels of communication. How rich or lean is it? Is it going to be something that is instantaneous, the synchronous, or can there be delays, the asynchronous method of communication? And also, is it going to be permanent or temporary? Those are some of the really, really big ideas that we can truly evaluate and determine what is the most appropriate and what best fits our objectives and needs. Every situation is different, and the norms change regarding what is a good or poor use of communication. One example that I have shared with classes in the past is in my previous role when I was doing all of my courses for my PhD. I was at North Dakota State University, and I was what they called the basic course director. I oversaw all of our public speaking classes, and this was a mid-sized university, so there were usually about 30 people who reported to me because of this class. Well, one of our instructors graduated. She finished up her master's degree, and she was on the job market. See, because I was her supervisor, it made sense that she would use me as a reference, and I was happy to do so until she asked me to. And the only reason that it bothered me is because it demonstrated such questionable communication skills. Instead of calling me and asking me, sending me an email, texting even, she had my cell phone number as well as my office number, she posted her request to my Facebook wall. What does that say about an individual who chooses a method of communication, a channel, that is just seemingly inappropriate? We have just these general ideas of what is appropriate and inappropriate. It's not written down anywhere. But what we can do is really think about the perceptions that people are going to have about us, and recognize that the channels of communication that we choose tie into the idea of impression management. We are wanting to go back to some of those ideas from chapter 3 and create a sense of identity and portray a sense of identity, and make sure that how we are choosing to communicate, the channels that we choose or the mediated communication channels that we use, are going to be perceived as appropriate. Sometimes it's going to be perceived as the most personal because it's the richest way of communicating, and there are lots of emotions in certain conversations and they need to be the forefront. Sometimes we're in situations where it needs to be as professional as possible. So we will send a formal letter or email. And again, we need to be aware that people are developing opinions of us, and how effective our communication is going to be extends from the idea of which channels it is that we choose to use. So that's the big takeaway that I don't think was really in the text. There's a lot of other good information regarding how people choose to communicate online, some of the differences beyond how rich or lean, how synchronous or asynchronous, and how permanent or temporary the messages are. It's all good content. I think you'll absorb it easily enough. And also the idea of privacy. I wish that online privacy were possible. I disagree with our authors a little bit. I don't think there's a whole lot that we can do to absolutely guarantee online privacy, but it is a consideration that we should keep in mind as well. It doesn't tie directly into interpersonal communication all the time. It's just general well-being. So that's the quick synopsis of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed and find things really, really pertinent and eye-opening. Again, you're going to be combining the ideas from chapter 2 with chapter 5 just to make it a little bit richer to apply one of the concepts from chapter 2. So look forward to a couple of activities that use these things, and if you have questions, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm happy to provide different examples or try to explain things in yet another way.